I never imagined I'd find myself baking with such care again. It was 6 in the evening, and the oven was already filling the kitchen with a warm, sweet scent that took me back to my mother's days. Pumpkin, cinnamon, and a hint of clove. Outside, a breeze rustled the branches of the old maple tree, and I felt an odd sense of calm. Alone, yes, but at peace. I lit a candle in the entryway, one of those small rituals no one else knows about. I lived on the top floor of an old house in a small town, perched on a hill. My days passed slowly, quietly, like the pages of a book no one dares to finish. Sometimes, the only sounds were the creak of the hardwood under my feet and the distant song of a blackbird. I slid the second tray into the oven and wiped my hands on a cloth. Just as I was about to brew some tea, there was a knock at the door. Not the doorbell, 3 sharp taps. I hesitated. No one came by at this hour. I opened the door, and there he was, a young man, dark-haired, with a few days' stubble and honest eyes. He held a wrench in one hand and an empty jar in the other. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "I'm David, the new neighbor downstairs. I'm cooking and ran out of salt. Do you have any?" I nodded with a faint smile, not sure why. Maybe it was the calm, unhurried way he spoke, like a memory from another time. I invited him in, found the salt shaker, and as I did, the oven's cozy aroma filled the air again. "Pumpkin bread?" he asked, his eyes lighting up like a kid's. "Pumpkin muffins," I replied. "Want one?" I don't know why I offered or why he accepted. But 10 minutes later, he was sitting at my small kitchen table, a mug of tea in his hands, a grateful smile on his face. "You have no idea how much I appreciate this," he said. "It's been a rough week." I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Sometimes words just get in the way. We talked a little about the weather, the neighborhood, how the stairs creaked at night. He asked if I lived alone. I nodded, not elaborating, and he didn't press. Outside, the light faded slowly. The clock above the door read 11:15. I was shocked at the time. How had it passed so quickly? "Mind if I stay a bit longer?" he asked, no longer hiding his exhaustion. "It's cold out there," I said. That was enough. I pointed to the living room couch, and he nodded with gratitude. I gave him an old but clean blanket and went to my room, closing the door. Before turning off the light, I glanced at the clock, 11:57, nearly midnight. He was still there. I left the folded blanket on the couch's armrest and a glass of water on the side table. We didn't say much more, just nodded, as if we both understood something delicate hung between us, something words might break. I locked myself in my room, turned off the light, and sat on the bed, still dressed. I heard his slow steps in the living room, the sound of him adjusting the pillow, then silence. A different kind of silence. For years, I'd lived with a heavy silence, the kind that presses on your chest and seeps into your bones. The silence of a radio off, untouched dishes, empty greetings on the stairs. But tonight, this silence was softer, a little awkward, not from sadness but from something new. I didn't sleep right away. I stayed awake, listening to nothing, and in that nothing, he was there. Morning came with the smell of coffee, not a memory, but real. I walked out in my robe. He was in the kitchen, wearing my green apron with the daisy embroidery, brewing coffee in my old Italian coffee maker like he'd done it 1,000 times. "Good morning," he said without turning. I replied in a voice so soft it surprised me. I sat and watched him. I didn't ask why he was still there. I didn't want to break the spell. He set 2 mugs on the table, poured his, and took a sip as if he'd always lived here. He said he'd slept well, that he liked the house, that it reminded him of his grandmother's place in a nearby town. He asked if the radiator in the living room always rattled like that. I laughed, something I hadn't done so early in a long time. He left without haste, without promises, closing the door gently. With him went something I couldn't name. The house felt too quiet after that, too still. He didn't come back the next day or the day after. For 3 days, the radiator clattered as usual, the radio stayed silent, and the muffins hardened in the fridge. I thought of him more than I cared to admit, catching myself looking out the window, listening for his steps on the stairs. Ridiculous, at my age, waiting for someone like that. But on the 4th afternoon, while watering the plants on the windowsill, I heard his voice downstairs, greeting the neighbor on the first floor with that easy warmth I'd nearly forgotten. I stepped back quickly, as if caught spying. Minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened it. There he was, a shy smile, a screwdriver in his pocket. "I was thinking about that radio you mentioned," he said. "Mind if I take a look? I like fixing old things." I didn't recall mentioning the radio, but it was there, forgotten in the living room cabinet, a wedding gift from a time when I thought music could fix everything. I handed it to him without much talk. He took it to the dining table and began taking it apart with a care I hadn't expected. "It's got good bones," he said, "but the wires are brittle, like they haven't carried a current in years." I nodded. It felt like a perfect metaphor. I sat across from him, watching his hands move, his focus steady. It reminded me of my husband, years ago, tinkering for hours to avoid talking. "Are you afraid it'll work?" he asked suddenly, not looking up. The question caught me off guard. I didn't know how to answer. Maybe I was afraid the radio would play and bring back memories with nowhere to live. A spark crackled, and a faint static filled the room. A soft voice came through, then a gentle, old melody I couldn't place, but that made me close my eyes. "There it is," he said, pleased. I didn't cry, I wouldn't let myself, but something shifted inside, like an old piece of furniture dragged from the depths of my soul. It got late without us noticing. I offered soup. He wasn't hungry, but took a mug anyway. He stayed a while longer, and when he stood to leave, something pushed me to speak. "Why do you fix things you don't need? Because if I don't, maybe no one will." He closed the door softly, and for the first time in years, the radio played in a house that didn't feel so empty. The next morning, I woke early, not from noise or duty. I just opened my eyes and knew I had to get up. Outside, a fine rain fell, the kind that doesn't soak you all at once but seeps in slowly. I made coffee and took it to the living room. The radio was still on, as if afraid to return to silence, playing slow, ghostly instrumental music. I sat in my armchair by the window, looking at the maple. My father planted it when I was 7. They said it wouldn't thrive in this cold soil, that maples needed more moisture. But he insisted, dug with his hands, watered it daily, even talked to it like another child. That first winter, it lost all its leaves. My mother said it was dead, but in March, it sprouted, refusing to give up. That's why I never cut it down, even though its trunk now leans toward the house, its branches scratching the window on windy days. David arrived mid-morning, unannounced, with 2 coffees and a sweet roll. He shook the rain from his jacket and smiled like he belonged. "Radio still working?" he asked. "Yes, and it's less annoying than some people." He laughed, set the coffee on the table, and looked out the window. "That tree's beautiful, like something from a storybook." "My father planted it," I said. "He promised if I cared for it, it'd outlive me. And you've kept it alive. Not always, but it hasn't complained." We talked about trees, roots, the places where you sink them without realizing. He told me his mother died when he was 10, that his father raised him as best he could, that he always felt something was missing, though he didn't know what. I didn't tell him I'd lost things too, some slowly, some all at once. That day, I didn't want to talk about pain. I showed him the scar on my wrist from cutting a branch off the maple over 30 years ago. He touched it gently, without pity or curiosity, just touched it. "Trees bleed too sometimes," he said quietly. I didn't know what to say. We spent the afternoon in silence, watching the rain, listening to the radio, seeing the maple shed its wet leaves one by one. When he left, he set his mug in the sink like it was his. And he left a sentence hanging in the air. "You're not alone. Maybe you just forgot what that feels like." The whispers started with the butcher's crooked smile when he saw me leave the fruit shop with 2 extra apples. Then the pharmacist, lowering her voice to ask if I needed something to sleep. Finally, Carmen, my neighbor from the 3rd floor, who I hadn't spoken to in years beyond a quick hello, said it outright. "You look different, livelier. It's that new guy, isn't it?" I didn't answer, pretended I didn't hear, but my cheeks burned. David had started coming by almost daily. He didn't live here, not officially, but he knew where I kept the dish towels, which mug I preferred, what radio station never failed. There were no kisses, no touches, but there was something that lingered like the smell of fresh bread, something that ached for its uncertainty. That Thursday, he brought a book, Stories for People Who Stopped Believing in Stories. He left it on the table without a word. I sat to read while he fixed a hinge that had squeaked since 1997. We shared a warm bowl of soup, the kind that needs no explanation. But the next day at the bakery, the murmurs were louder. "Have you seen the widow from the top floor? She doesn't seem so widowed anymore." Something broke inside, not loudly, but deeply. That night I didn't sleep. I paced the house, replaying every word, every glance, every gesture. What did they think? What did they say? What right did they have? At 3 a.m., I locked the door as if I could shut out the world. But 5 minutes later, I unlocked it, because the air without him felt too thick, and deep down, I wasn't afraid of their words. I was afraid of feeling nothing again. That morning, the rain pounded the roof, as if the sky had a score to settle with me. I woke with damp eyes, though I didn't recall dreaming. It was one of those days when the past creeps back, not forcefully, but heavily. I went to the hallway closet, one I hadn't opened in years. The door creaked, resisting, and there was the box, wooden, painted with faded flowers. Inside, everything I couldn't bear to throw away. Letters, photos, notes he left on the fridge before heading to work. David arrived unannounced, with bread and 2 tangerines. He took off his coat and looked at me in silence. The box was open on the table, and I didn't try to hide it. "May I?" he asked gently. I nodded. He sat across from me and started reading, not silently, but aloud, as if the words needed to be heard again. There were letters I'd forgotten. Some were simple: "Don't forget to buy sugar. Won't be home for dinner." Others were from a time when we still dreamed together. He didn't judge, didn't ask, just read with a slowness that shook me. I didn't cry, but inside, each word stirred dust I didn't want to see. In one photo, I was 30 years younger, sitting in this same living room, with the same tablecloth, the same lamp, and another woman in the background. My sister, gone now. David picked up the photo, looked at it, and set it down carefully like it was fragile. "And this?" he asked, pointing to a letter on blue paper, the last one written to me before he left. I never replied. He read it silently, folded it, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Can I hold on to this for a bit?" he said. "I want to understand something. I don't know what, but I want to try." I nodded, realizing it didn't hurt, because something in me had started to trust his way of being. That night, the maple stood still, as if it, too, was listening. For the first time, I didn't feel buried in my memories, but held by them. The door opened with a sharp thud, no pleasantries. "Why haven't you called?" my daughter said, no greeting. Her coat was wet, her face tight, her voice like a blade. I hadn't invited her, but it wasn't unusual. Unannounced visits usually brought more complaints than hugs. I offered a towel. She refused, standing in the hallway like the air weighed her down. Then she saw David, sitting at my table with the book of stories, reading glasses on, calm as ever. "This is him, isn't it?" she said, her tone churning my stomach. "The one you're spending all your time with." I didn't know what to say, didn't try to justify it. "Mom, this isn't normal. You don't know what people are saying. It's not right, not healthy." Her words weren't new. I'd heard them before in different forms from different mouths. But now they came from her, my daughter, the one person I thought might understand. David stood. "I'll step out for a bit," he said quietly, "so you can talk." I didn't stop him. The moment the door closed, the room filled with something worse than silence, judgment. "Do you know what you're doing? Do you see how this looks? A woman alone, your age, getting wrapped up with a man young enough to be your son. What's he after? What are you after?" I took a deep breath and said something unplanned. "I'm trying not to vanish. I want someone to see me without pity, to listen without rushing, to read me, even if they don't understand every word." She didn't reply, just looked down. I didn't cry. When David returned, she was gone. He didn't ask what happened, just sat, opened the book where he'd left off, and kept reading, as if he knew answers lay in the pages we hadn't reached. That night, I didn't sleep, not from anger, but from something harder, the echo of all the voices telling me how to live. For the first time, I dared not to listen. Dawn broke with fog, the hill wrapped in a white blanket, as if the world wanted to hush a little longer. I sat in my usual armchair, a warm mug of tea in my hands, waiting. For what, for whom, I didn't know. David was in the kitchen, quiet, barely making a sound. The slice of a knife through bread, the soft whistle of water heating, the radio murmuring old music. It felt like a secret ritual. I watched from my corner. He didn't look at me, but he knew I was there. And somehow that was enough. We didn't talk about my daughter or what others might say or the past or memories. We didn't talk. But in that silence was more companionship than in many conversations I'd had. Mid-morning, he brought a chair from the kitchen and set it beside my armchair. We sat, both looking at the maple. Its leaves were nearly gone. Winter was coming. "I don't need to do anything today," he said, not quite to me. I nodded. "Me neither." I thought of all the times I'd wished for someone to save me, to show up with answers, grand gestures, or comforting words. But now I understood something. You don't always need saving. Sometimes it's enough for someone to stay. The radio played all day old songs, lost voices, news that no longer troubled me. In my house, which for so long was just a house, there was now something more. A rhythm, a breath, a pause. As night fell, we didn't turn on the lights. We didn't need to. In that warm darkness, with tea, the radio, and glances that no longer sought words, I realized something. I didn't need to understand it all, name it, or explain it. Because sometimes, when life returns, it does so without a single word.